Welcome to Pro Audio Perspectives. I'm Brendan Decora, and on the show, we'll dive into the heart and soul of the music industry. I enjoy candid conversations with professionals from across the pro audio field. In each episode, we explore the emotional connections and the artistry behind the music, going beyond the technical aspects to uncover what truly inspires great performances. Thanks for joining me. Enjoy. On today's show, we have Dave Way. He has credits with Fiona Apple, Iron and Wine, Christina Aguilera, Michael Jackson, Macy Gray, and many more. Enjoy. So I want to thank you first and foremost for being on the show.
My pleasure.
Really
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. I'd like to start, if you could kind of go over your backstory, kind of what led you to engineering and production, how you got to where you are, that kind of thing.
The early years?
Yeah.
Well, I was a musician when I was a kid. I played in bands and started on piano, then went to guitar after a couple of years, and bass after that, and then drums after that. So I kind of was always playing music, and I was writing songs.
Were you in bands and stuff? Or?
Yeah, a couple of bands, probably from about the time I was 13, 14, something like that.
Okay, nice.
And kind of all through high school and a few years after. And then I went to Berklee College of Music, so that's kind of when the band stopped and the studying, and I kind of decided that I needed to get into the engineering side. I all of a sudden a light bulb went off after a kind of couple of one failed semester at Tulane University, where I was just like, what am I doing here? And it made me think about what I want to do. I was like, well, I really like music, and but I don't think I want to, I'm not good enough to be a rock star, and, but I do like making demos, because I used to have, a couple of tape machines. I had a 1/4-inch Sony tape machine, a mono tape machine that was one of the guys in the bands, and I kind of convinced him to keep it at my house so that we could use it to record things, and then I would go back and forth between that and a cassette machine through this little PA mixer that we had. Anyway, so I was just interested in the studio side of things, especially since I was also a huge Beatles fan, and I used to just dissect those records, and like the later period Beatles records just kind of blew my mind. I was like, how do they do this? What is that? How do the vocals sound like that? What is that weird sound? And the panning, and I used to listen in headphones all the time, and so my mind was trying to figure out what that all, how that all worked. And so when I decided that was maybe a cool job that I could do.
And you went to Berklee. Did you go as like performance first and then switch?
No, I decided I wanted to be an engineer. And at that time, this is like very early 80s. At that time, there was really nowhere where you could get a degree. And Berklee had just started a program. I think it had been in existence 1 year when I got there. And because my parents kind of insisted that I get a degree, So I was like, okay. And so I didn't think I would get in, but crazy, I got in. And but when you're there, you have to play, an instrument. And I was playing bass when I was there. And but I pretty quickly, as soon as I got there, I was like, this is it. This is what I want to do. Nice. And couldn't wait to get in the studios. Like the first year, you couldn't actually, get into the studios that were on the campus, but it was all theoretical stuff. But I brought my same stuff that I had. I had a couple of cassette machines and this little mixer and a couple of microphones, and me and my roommates used to just stay up all night and make demos, and he'd write songs and I would record them, and so I was, that was my shedding at the time, and I learned a lot doing that stuff,
Awesome.
And then graduated from Berklee after 4 years, and went back to New York, which is where I'm from, and got a gig at the Hit Factory in New York, and kind of started as a runner there.
Nice.
Yeah. And
And what led you to L.A.?
And I was working in New York. I got hooked up with a producer named Teddy Riley, and I was kind of his guy, his engineer and mixer for a couple of years. This is probably 89 through about 91.
Okay.
When he got the call to come out to California to work with Michael Jackson. And so I was like, wow, okay, that'll be cool. So we came out here for an extended period of time. We didn't know how long it was going to be. Turned out to be, well, really about 8 months on the record. This was an album called Dangerous.
Okay.
And I kind of came out here and I was like, this is great. This is like the studios are happening, and the weather's great.
Right.
I was just getting into golf at the time, so I brought my clubs out here because I knew I was going to be out for a couple of months.
Right.
And one of the first things I asked the concierge at the hotel, like, where's a golf course around here? And he told me a couple, and then he told me about this little par 3 course on Whitsett Avenue, which ironically is right down the block from here.
Right.
And I would go. It was right on the way to the studio, around the block, really, on the way to the studio.
Nice.
And I started, going there and getting my golf in before that, and this was like in February, and the weather's perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
This is my speed right here.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Nice.
Now they tore that golf course down. That was like, my favorite place. It was our little private golf course, me and my buddies. But
nice.
We're on the look for a new place now.
So then nowadays, are you doing more production, mixing? Is there anything you kind of specialize in?
Yeah, I mean, before COVID, I would say I'd gotten more into production and was doing a good deal. I would say. Not quite 50% of the stuff I was doing, but a good 30-40% of the stuff was just things I was producing and recording and mixing. And then just around the time of COVID, 2020, I set up for Atmos. And it just kind of coincided with the first wave of Atmos mixing and releases, and so and the fact that nobody was then coming by for any sessions anymore, it kind of worked out perfectly where I was doing just a lot of Atmos mixing, and stereo mixing too, but it was pretty much all mixing for 3 years, which is kind of what everybody was doing, really. I mean, we made a couple of records. We made a record at East West, and I think that was 2020 or 21, I can't remember. Yeah. But but now I'd say it's still mostly mixing. I do some sessions here once in a while. I'm not producing as much, but still a little bit. I've done a couple of things this year. I did another album, an artist named Bad Think, that we've done 5 or 6 albums. We just finished another one. And I mixed in stereo and Atmos, and then I just produced an album for an artist named Julian Villard, who's a buddy of mine. We recorded that all here and mixed it here.
Awesome.
So that this year I've probably done so far a couple records producing, but the rest of it's been mixing, and I'd say most of that, a lot of the mixing now I do Atmos and stereo at the same time. If it's especially if it's like if it's an album that I'm producing, yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and I just have to mix it once. This was like Bob Clearmountain's. I saw how he does it, and I was like, yeah, why do we do 2 separate mixes? Don't do it all the time. Sometimes it worked out. I did an Iron and Wine record recently where we recorded the whole thing here and then mixed it in stereo, and then because Sam, the artist, was here while we were mixing, so I just thought it'd be better to do it in stereo, get it locked down first, and then I just spread it out into Atmos afterwards. So, and that
has it ever
well
happened kind of the other way, where the Atmos mix has inspired the stereo mix in a way?
Well, when I'm doing both, I kind of start with the Atmos mix and get everything kind of where I think it will work in Atmos first, and then check it in stereo, make sure it's working in two speakers.
Right. Huh.
Go back and forth a couple of times, make some adjustments. So, for the kind of, it starts in Atmos. And then every once in a while, there'll be something that you're going to, move something around in Atmos that, obviously in stereo, it's not going to be the same. But sometimes I might make a separate Atmos mix just for that so that I can make it work for just stereo and then for go with the extra mile on Atmos.
Exactly.
But rarely, most of the time it's just that both happen simultaneously.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, one thing I like to talk about a lot on the show is kind of how to inspire artists in the studio and get great performances and that kind of stuff. And it's honestly, it's cool. I love your studio here where you can do full tracking with bands and all that. How do you sort of, when you're first starting a project, how do you prepare an artist for the studio to get them comfortable?
Yeah, I mean, it always depends, right? You gotta get a sense of who they are and what their past experiences or lack of past experiences is coming into play. So with somebody who's been, I kind of see the role as a producer and even just as an engineer, is to make the artist feel as comfortable as possible, right? So for me, when someone's coming here and say if I'm producing, I want to get a gauge first on how comfortable are they just recording in general, right? Because most artists are insecure, especially when it gets down to having to do vocals and things like that. And some have a really strong grasp of what they want, how the instrumentation's going to work within the production and the writing aspect. So you kind of got to get a sense of all that stuff. Some need a lot of guidance and help with that. Some don't want any input at all. Yeah. So maybe a couple of meetings and phone calls and just strategizing beforehand. I'm not asking those questions, but I'm getting a sense of all that from the questions that I do ask. And with the idea that once I know where they're at when they come in, I'm going to set them up in a way and set them up with people that I know they'll hopefully feel comfortable with,
like
and
session
confident.
players,
session players, and that's casting is a big part of it, and getting somebody who gets it and also is just going to be a cool vibe in the studio. So and even sometimes just somebody's background may or may not mesh with. Whether they played with somebody that the artist doesn't like. Oh, but he played with so-and-so. It's like, I don't like that. These kind of things come into play. Or, there's all kinds of things that might enter in. But then specifically, once we're starting, I try and get it set up here where it's all ready to go. Drums are set up, mic, a good selection of drums is there so that when the drummer walks in, I try and figure out what we're trying to do, what kind of a sound we're getting, and set up some drums that are going to hopefully work for the vibe we're going for. Of course, we might change out some snares and kick drums or cymbals or whatever, but something that the drummer's going to feel like, this is going to be good. I don't have to bring my arsenal of drums here and, crates of, truckloads of drums. And the same thing with, guitars. Guitars usually going to bring a couple of axes and things that they're comfortable with. But there's other instruments around here that hopefully will inspire people. And same thing with keyboards and amplifiers and all this kind of stuff. So what I hope to do is when they walk in, we're hanging out, having some coffee, talking, getting a good atmosphere going. Everybody's feeling good. And then we start going over the song, maybe in here with just the guitar and the singer and the artist just giving us a guide through. Guys are making their charts, and we go out and play, and they put on the headphones, and it sounds good. The headphone mix is there, and they hear reverb, and they hear, it sounds like a record. So that's happening quickly, it's amazing how confident everybody can feel off of that first take, because if it doesn't feel good, all of a sudden these questions and doubts come right up to the front, and everybody's like, yeah, is this the right player? I don't know. Is he the right guy? Or am I going to be able to sing good today? I don't think I sound good in the headphones. And, so if you can squelch that immediately, makes the whole process, the whole album go, much more smoothly, and you get smiles in the control room, and when you come back and listen. And I think, I'm a big believer that it's the attitude and the vibes in the studio that kind of come through when you press play at the end of the day.
Yeah. So, exactly. And that's kind of the thing with mixing too. Like I often say that, I help artists kind of, overcome that doubt and that unfulfillment, in the last step of the production was mixing.
If that first mix you send them, or they're they're here for it, and they're like, okay, this is going to be okay. This is like, you get the confidence, and then maybe you can push the boundaries a little bit,
Exactly. Yeah.
Because that's the other thing is if you try and I find if baby steps as far as pushing the artist, because you're always trying to push the artist into maybe into a place where they can do better than they even think they can, and or try something that's a little outside their comfort zone stylistically, and so if you start right there, you might get some resistance and blowback and or just doubts and things. But if you can kind of creep your way towards that, and so like day 3, day 4, you're kind of trying something different, experimenting, just trying something that nobody ever would have thought of before you were getting started.
Awesome. Is there, I don't normally like to ask about specific projects or people, but when it comes to engineering, and especially like you mentioned Michael Jackson, like when you were just the engineer on those projects, so how did you work with that scenario?
Well, I mean, in that case, Michael had been making records, 30 years or something like that. Exactly. You know what I mean? I mean, almost 25 years, and he knew what he wants, and so that's those are the times when you're just like, let me stay out of the way and be as invisible as possible, and just let them do their thing, and not be put up any obstacles or anything that's going to slow down the process. So you're just trying to be fast and be efficient and communicate well, listen well. Michael was amazing. He would one of the first time I recorded his vocal was a song called Remember the Time, and he had a idea just for the chorus. Right. So he wanted to just sing, because we had a track already. We came in with all these tracks that we had recorded before we even came out to California, and so we just played these tracks for him. And he said, "Oh, I like that one. I like that one. And he would come up with ideas for it. So he had this chorus idea for "Remember the Time," and he was so good singing. I've told this story before, but I'll maybe tell it again. Where back then, this is like early '90s, but particularly in R&B records, we used to record the chorus vocals once, just in one chorus, and then fly it in all the other choruses, right? So different producers had different ways of doing that. With Teddy, we used to, we record all the stacks of the chorus vocals, and then I'd get a blend on it, pan it and balance and everything, and then he'd just sample that into a sampler, an S1000 stereo sampler, and then trigger it with MIDI or even fly it in with a finger touch, but usually with MIDI. And so that all the choruses were exactly the same, and that was the style. And then they'd do stuttering kind of things or whatever, But so when we went to record this chorus the first time, that's kind of in my mind the way we were going to do it, because that's how Teddy always did it.
Yeah.
And so we went to I said to Michael, "You want to just do the first chorus? And he's like, oh, just start at the top. And so, started at the top, and we got through the first chorus, and he sang the first part. And at the end of the chorus, I pressed stop. And he's like, why'd you stop? And I was like, well, we're just doing the chorus, so I didn't think we needed to go any further. And, we're going to fly it in. And he didn't understand what I was talking about. And he said, just go back to the beginning and go all the way through the song. And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
So he sang the first chorus and sang it perfectly, and second chorus, third chorus, and the outro double chorus, a little differently each time, but each time perfect. And he's like, okay, let's do another track. I'll double that or whatever. And we went through the whole song.
Nice.
6-8 times, whatever it was.
Right.
And he sang every track perfectly, like in time and in tune. And maybe we would punch once or twice. Just he'd be like, "Oh, pick me up there," whatever. And we were done in like 20 minutes. We had the whole song done.
Nice.
And I just thought to myself, why don't we do this all the time? Because we just got it. The other way of doing it, we'd have to get the balance and then fly it in and put it on the MIDI and blah blah. And and then I realized it's not often we're recording Michael Jackson. We can just do it all the way through. So that was the answer. Yeah.
Nice. What are your thoughts on the role of experimentation and risk-taking in production?
Yeah, I love to. Like I said before, a lot of it depends on the artist and how comfortable they are, and sometimes you're trying to push them to do something either that they haven't done before, or work with somebody who they are maybe not quite so sure about stylistically. I like to push. I know, there are some people out there who really try and stir it up to where, and oftentimes they're trying to convert the artist into their comfort zone and how they like to work. And that's, that's asking a lot of the artist to change for your process. Right. I'm not that guy at all. And I'm not, I'm a firm believer that, particularly as an engineer, but even as a producer too, that our job is to help the artist get their vision out.
Of course.
And like I said, sometimes the artist has a very strong vision and they know exactly what they want. And that sometimes is easier because if you have a good, big toolkit and wide vocabulary and, you understand what everybody's trying to do, just getting it is going to be 85% of the gig.
Right.
But then there are times when the artist maybe is all over the place. They have different styles and different influences that don't seem to make sense together, and maybe they're trying to say do one country song and one rock song and one pop song all within an album, and it maybe doesn't make sense, and so you're trying to find a way to blend them within the songs to where these influences blend in a way that's balanced and makes sense.
Yeah. And then how do you, like, I've even had projects where the artist tells me they like an aspect of the demo, but then they'll send me references, like when I'm mixing, for example.
Right.
They'll send me references that are the opposite of what they said they like in the demo. So it's like, how do you navigate those things?
Yeah. Maybe try and point out that discrepancy that they're, that what they're saying actually isn't what they're hearing or whatever, or just, put it in a way that's like, well, to me, when I hear that, it sounds like this.
Right.
And, it's a discussion. Look, just communicating and talking honestly with the artist while at the same time being encouraging. I just try to not bring negative energy into the conversation, right? It's like, oh, you shouldn't do that, or you should, or it's like, oh, if we do that, we're going to lose these listeners or whatever. It's like, that's not kind of the way to approach it. I think for me, it's trying to keep things positive and finding what's unique about the artist, because everyone is totally unique, even if they wear their influences on their sleeve,
right.
and they're trying maybe to sound like somebody else or something they've heard before. It's still going to go through their filter, and it's going to be somehow unique when it comes through them, and so if you can kind of tune into that part of it a little more than tuning into the source of the inspiration.
Right.
That can help you kind of get to that place.
Absolutely. And we talked a little bit about Atmos and stuff before, but how has the landscape of music production changed creatively in recent years?
Well, I guess, I'm not too involved in making like pop records the way I was 20, 30 years ago, right? Where, because I kind of grew up coming up with Teddy Riley and L.A. and Babyface and Dallas Austin and these kind of producers who are really kind of the artists in a lot of ways back then, right? Yeah. So it was very producer-driven, and these producers wrote the songs, made the tracks, sometimes sang the guide vocals, and it was very much... they'd write a song for this artist, but that artist didn't use it, and so they'd give it to this other artist.
Yeah.
That's still, in a lot of ways the way records are made. The teams are a lot bigger now than they might have been back then. It used to be maybe one or two. One producer or a team of two. Jam and Lewis and L.A. and Babyface or whatever, but. Now you've got a kind of team of guys who make the beats and guys who make the top line and the vocal arranger and, a guy who comes up with the chords, whatever. Right. And it's kind of, in a lot of ways, for me, hasn't changed all that much. I was at the bowling alley the other day with my son, and they were just playing... the jukebox, it was a video jukebox, was just playing hits of the last 30 years. So they're playing things back to In Sync or something from the late 90s or early 2000s up to current pop records. And as I'm listening to it, it's like, this really hasn't changed hardly at all. I mean, it's really, for the most part, drum machine programmed kind of bass and drums and instrumentation and multi-layered vocals with kind of a good amount of effects on them, and they're all perfectly into, the amount of auto-tune has changed over the years and, that kind of stuff. But they're still 3-4 minute songs with a verse and a chorus and a breakdown and, they're made for the same people, mainly teenagers and young people, and the artists really haven't changed on it. You look at whatever, if it's whether or not it just hasn't changed all that much when you compare. So say I go back to 25 years ago, an In Sync record or a Natasha Bedingfield record or something like that. Look at the difference between then and now, and then if I were to compare that to the difference between 1945 and 1965, right, and how music changed in that 20 years, completely different. 1945, you had Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman swing music made by songs were written by songwriters, arranged by these band leaders who had bands who would go out and they had a featured singer who was just the singer, and they were recorded live. There were no overdubs. It was and they were made for still for the most part a young audience, but maybe not. It was still more universal. Records. There wasn't a delineation between teenagers so much and adult listener. And the songs were mainly about love, or somebody going off to war and missing people, whatever. Fast forward to 1965 and or 66 and Tomorrow Never Knows. I mean, it's completely different in all aspects of who it's made by, how, now you've got the band writing the song, and you've got four guys, not a big band. You've got four guys playing electric guitars.
Right.
The instrumentation is completely different. Who the writers are, who the singers are. The record making process is completely different. They're introducing loops and overdubs and multi-track. I mean, panning. It's in stereo. Yeah. It's leaps and bounds. Apart.
Okay. Yeah. That's
not so much over the last 20 years.
Right.
Yeah.
Really, in the last 40 years, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, really, when I started, which is, a good 30 plus years ago, it's still, for the most part, similar. We get a beat going and write a song on top of a beat,
Exactly. Awesome. Before we started, we talked a little bit about, photography and different aspects. What are some unexpected sources of inspiration for your productions, be it literature, visual, art?
Yeah, I mean, for me, oftentimes inspiration just comes from taking a break and getting outside of the cubicle that we're in and going out for a walk or going to the baseball game or just getting out of that headspace. And I mean, for me, my family and friends is a big influence and a big inspiration. It's like it's just kind of getting in touch with what real life is about and not work so much. Because it is work. We're working, we're and we have goals and we're trying to accomplish something, and we're lucky that it's also play time for the most part. We get to just kind of come up with ideas and we get to be creative. But sometimes you get so inside the details and things that you just kind of need to take a break and get out of it. That's why I always feel like just even when you're doing a session, that first take after lunch, whatever it is, tends to be the best take of the day because you've just cleared your head of everything and everybody's sharing a meal, having fun, telling stories. We're sitting down, maybe it's outside and the sun and the birds and then you come in and maybe have a cup of coffee again or and just get going, and it's like everything's already dialed in for the most part, so you just put on the headphones and play.
It's just
best part of the day usually. Yeah. And knowing when to order lunch and when that take's going to come is a big part of it.
Yes. And it's also like, I'm sure, like anyone in our field, we've spent many very long hours in the studio. You lock out a studio, nights. It's 12-hour lock, so working from home, even mixing, you get to set your own hours a little more.
So I think I know there are people out who feel like if they're not torturing themselves, they're not working hard, right? And if they're not torturing everybody around them, it's even worse. They're not doing their job. They're not trying, know. And that doesn't. I've been on the receiving end of that, and I know it's not inspiring. It ends up being a drag, and like I said, I believe that the vibes in the atmosphere in the studio is kind of what comes through when you're pressing play at the end of the day. And if you're torturing everybody in the room, I think those are the records that sound labored over. They don't sound inspired. They maybe sound just a little too perfect and
little manufactured.
Yeah. Whereas put on "Give Me Some Lovin'" and
exactly.
That's a moment right there.
Exactly. Awesome. You kind of touched on some in the beginning, but is there any current or recent projects that you want to talk about that you can?
Recently. Well, I'm really proud and happy about the Iron and Wine record that we did here not too long ago. That just came out a couple of weeks ago. And that was one of those, like what I was talking about, where it just went well from the very first song, the first playback. Everybody was comfortable and feeling good. And we had just such an amazing session where Sam, the artist, brought in these great songs, and there were no arrangements fleshed out or anything. The band just was coming up with them on the fly.
Nice.
And I mean, he had sent just like voice memos of him singing and playing the song on guitar.
Okay.
And you could hear that they're great songs just in that, basic state. But then the band brought in all these songs, and they're so good. Such good listen. Like everybody in the band was basically a producer. So everybody's got ears to listen to what everybody else is doing, and then find their role within that, And so to watch and just in a way just see it just happen was so great, because Sam's so good that whatever take we did, his vocal from that take, because he was in here with an SM7, just, playing guitar and singing. And we'd all listen back, and we'd maybe had done 3 or 4 takes, and we'd say, let's listen to those last 2. We listen to those, and it's like, that's the take.
Right.
Great. And whatever that vocal was on that take was the vocal. Right. Unless he made a mistake or, got a lyric wrong or something, we'd fix that. But outside of that,
nice.
That was the take for everyone, and we'd do a little bit of editing and stuff after the fact. Some songs more than others, but it was just okay. Let's go. Let's put another overdub on that, and let's double the vocals and put some harmonies here. And then Paul Cartwright would come up with these amazing string parts off the top of his head, and he'd do a full string arrangement in an hour.
Dang.
And we'd have the strings on the song.
That's awesome.
And then we'd be like, all right, that's great. Let's put it to bed and let's do another song. We'd do like
that's awesome.
2, sometimes 3 songs a day like that.
Nice.
It was crazy.
Nice. That's awesome. Sweet. I like to wrap up each podcast with the same sort of set of questions. The first one is, who has been your most influential teacher? And it can be a couple if you want.
Teachers are,
not literal
like, do
teacher.
the Beatles count? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
because
sure.
because it's
of
like
course.
That's. I gotta say, and I'll pull out the Beatles just because, and maybe particularly McCartney in that, and Ringo also, but seeing these guys at 80 plus years old,
right?
I mean, they're not only teachers in popular music and songwriting and using the studio and they are were and still are the most famous people in the world, and have dealt with that fame in such a way that like I can't believe that they're still cool.
Yeah, they're still humble and nice.
And it's really a lesson, and also in how to get older gracefully and be in touch with who you are at your core, knowing what makes you happy, having a family life, in addition to being that famous and having a workload that's just insane, I'm sure. Not that I'm trying to be them, but I look at them and say, hell, that's how you do it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, whoever did that before these guys, really? I mean, there's guys who have been out on the road forever and doing it, but at that level of fame and that, I think, level of balance between, work and home life, excuse me, it's crazy. It's
That's
crazy,
awesome.
and it's inspiring for sure.
Definitely, definitely. The next question is, what is your favorite reference track? But I've found there's more and more people that don't really use them so much anymore.
Yeah, I'm one of those. I don't really I don't have a reference track. I mean, I have maybe at certain points when I used to travel from studio to studio, and I'd try and get a sense of what the monitor sounded like in this room.
Right.
I used to play. There was a couple of songs I would play. There's the first track on. There's a Brad Mehldau album called Largo. Matt Chamberlain's playing drums. It's playing in my head now. I'm trying to remember what the name of it is. Yeah. I used to love playing that as my reference, just for how punchy and focused the drums are in that. And the low end, and then there's a Massive Attack, whatever the first song on that Mezzanine album,
Right.
which has that big, huge bass on it. That was one.
Nice.
Yeah, those were kind of two that I used to play a lot. And then sometimes I'll play like a Beatles song because it's like something that I've heard a million times that I can't help but know how it should sound.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Last question. What would be one tidbit for an upcoming engineer and producer?
Well, in this day and age, I think it's a different time than when I was kind of in that position and kind of trying to make a career. In this day and age, I feel like it's just and this is true of everything for the most part. You just got to go do it. Just start doing it. Don't wait for somebody to hire you or, tell you what you should do. You should just the gear and the possibilities of what you can do on your phone, but on a laptop and headphones is just insane. And having the resources of YouTube at your disposal, there's nothing that you can't learn how to do on your own, really. And in a way, I think that's kind of better to just start. I mean, I know for me, back then we didn't have those kind of resources, and I always found that things really stuck. I might have read something in Mix magazine or seen another engineer do something that I'd never heard of or never done before, and that still can be inspiring. And you find these tricks and ideas and things. Like I remember the first time I saw somebody trigger a new snare sound by just putting the Ortone on top of a snare and putting a mic on it. And I was like, oh yeah, that's a great idea, rather than using the AMS or something. Yeah. But in this day and age, you could just go for it and learn so much on your own. And that's my advice. Just go do it, whatever it is. And we live in a world now where it's not only true of music, but in photography or doing a podcast or, coding and making video games and all these kind of, areas are fairly similar in that regard, where you can just go out and start doing it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. That's awesome. Well, sweet. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. Awesome. It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
It's good to see you again, too.
Nice. Thanks for joining in today on Pro Audio Perspectives. Make sure to hit subscribe, and I'll see you next week.